You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Mike Chen back on the show with me today. He's here to talk about his brand new book, We Could Be Heroes. And if you love fun science fiction with a superhero twist, this is a must-have for your to-be-read pile. It needs to be sitting beside your bed or in your, next to your favorite reading chair, wherever it is that you love to get comfortable and get lost in a book. We Could Be Heroes must be in that spot. Thanks for joining me again, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for saying those really nice things, Hank. I did not pay Hank to say that.
Not at all, but it is the truth. It is the truth. Mike, you are one of my favorite authors. And when I saw that you had a new book out, I told Dawn, my wife, who's also the producer of the show, we've got to try to get Mike back on the show. I've had so much fun reading this book. How much time has gone into this story?
So it originally started as a short story back in 2016-ish, I think. Summer 2016. I sold it as a short story, and it's basically chapter 5. Chapter 5 is an adapted version of that. Originally, it was the two main characters, same powers. It's Jamie, who is also known as the Mind Robber, and Zoe, who is known as the Throwing Star. The only difference is in the short story, they meet up in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And instead here, it's more adapted to the bigger picture story, which is a memory loss and dementia support group, because they're really dealing with their memories. So I had the characters and their rough backstories in my head for a while. And then around 2018, I was talking with my agent about what are we going to do next. And I said, I would really like to try to expand on the stuff I did in that short story. But who's going to buy a superhero novel? That was like my big concern. But we sold it. And I think the timing is really right for it. Just as the timing was really bad for my last book, A Beginning at the End, which is a post-pandemic book that came out in January 2020. I think a lot of the reader feedback I'm getting with this one is that the timing is really good because people are looking for something with heart, but still light and fun and uplifting. Right.
10 years ago, or maybe not even that far back, your thoughts about the superhero genre in a prose novel were absolutely right. Like who would read prose about superheroes? It just doesn't. Those are mediums that don't seem to work together. Why do you think that might be changing? Because I've noticed, and we've had several authors on the show lately, and by lately I mean the last couple of years, where DC is doing some reimagining of their origin stories and things like that. Why do you think people are maybe opening themselves up to the possibility of enjoying a story like this?
Well, I'm really lucky in that it wasn't intentional, but I became friends with Natalie Zena Walshatz, who wrote a really awesome superhero book called Hench, and that came out in September. And we've been paired together in like when we do book conference panels and stuff. Like we got to know each other because we were paired together because we were like the superhero novelists. It was kind of like this weird anomaly. And so we've become friends from that. And that's a question that we actually get asked quite a bit. And I think part of it is the medium could have always worked if you adjusted your expectations and framed it properly. Because it's with books, you can't communicate information quickly like you can do in a visual medium. Sure. So So action has to be much more deliberate. But the flip side to that is you can get really into character. And I think you can get into character and you're not limited by like budget, like or like the size of a comic book panel. You're really able to do whatever the imagination dictates. So because of that, I think you're able to so with visual mediums, you're limited by the artist's physical space or the budget of a TV show or movie in terms of effects. So, but in prose, you're only limited by the imagination. So those are the trade-offs going on there. So I think it's always worked because like the imagination aspect clearly works if you look at science fiction and fantasy novels.
Of course.
I think with superheroes in particular, we are just used to seeing them in a visual format. So part of it is the audience had to be ready for this. And even what I see with like my daughter's books, like she reads the graphic novels for DC superhero girls, but we also got the young readers, like the novel collection to read to her. And so like these are, no pictures. I think they're probably like middle grade level. But they are very character driven. And the pacing is quick, but it doesn't match the pacing on TV or in a comic book because that's impossible. So I think it's just about changing the viewer or the reader expectations and understanding that it's going to take these situations that we're familiar with in other mediums, but then going much deeper into character with that and giving that space to breathe and explore.
Well, and we're definitely going through a renaissance period right now with the almost glut of superhero movies and TV shows. And, we're finally getting that itch scratched that a lot of us that are, kind of geeks at heart have longed for so long. But, once you've had the big splash on screen and the kind of adrenaline pumping action that you get in these, I think it does leave people longing for more character development, and that's what the novel can bring is that deep backstory and the real connection with the people behind the powers, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, I think like, I set out to do something where like I wanted to like the first two chapters introduce you to the archetype of a hero and a villain, but very quickly, like about halfway through each chapter, like we break past that facade and go into like who they are as people. And then first you establish them as individuals, and then as they get to know each other, like it goes deeper into like themes of friendship and trust and things like that. And while that can work like in a movie or a TV series, like you get much deeper into it with prose simply because you're like inside the character's head.
I love that this book began as a short story. I didn't know that, and now looking back on the book in framed that way, I can completely see how that I think you said chapter 5 was the original concept. Do you think about when you're starting a new project, if something's going to be a short story or if it will eventually be a novel? Do you have those kinds of feelings from the beginning?
I don't write too many short stories because I find them to be incredibly difficult. They are like when I've tried to write them in the past, the feedback I always get from my colleagues is you've written a chapter of a book, which does not work as a short story. You have to like cut, these parts and then make this part, more in depth. So it's a skill set that I haven't really developed much, and I actually find quite intimidating. So most of my ideas like are basically, does this have enough meat on the bones to sustain 70 to 100,000 words? So I have like a short list of ideas that probably don't fit a novel length, but I'm not quite sure what to do with them. Like whether to flesh them out into something with a little bit more depth or to try my hand at short stories again. I've probably only written, since I've really been, giving fiction a lot of time in my life, I've probably only written like 4 or 5 short stories, and only one of them has made it to publication, which is this one.
When you wrote that short story, did you envision the back and forward story that became the novel? Like were there things that you knew about these characters and about the situation that you didn't put into the story, but you kind of had them lingering in your mind?
Yeah, and actually, I just realized that I have had a second short story published, which is the in the Star Wars From a Certain Point of View anthology that just came out. But that's different because that's kind of like playing in your own favorite fan fiction sandbox. It's much different from trying to publish a short story on your own. But I knew when I wanted to bring this from short story to a full novel, I knew I wanted to keep the alternating. I wanted to do alternating points of view because I think both characters are equally interesting, and because this was designed to be a book about their friendship, I thought it was important to show an even amount of both sides of that. The basics that I had in mind already, I knew there was some mysterious incident that wiped out both of their memories. And I knew that would be like in the short story, that is the underlying thing that brings them to drinking, which is why they both go to an AA meeting. So similar things that drive them to the memory loss support group here. I knew that they were both highly troubled people who were fundamentally good underneath their superpowered facade. And I knew that the city itself would basically be like, San Francisco dressed up in something else. So those were like the basic tenets of it. The exact details of what is the thing that took their powers away and the mystery that they explore in this book, that was all like I just knew something had to happen. I didn't quite have those details yet, but it was more about where were they as people. That stuff was pretty established from the beginning.
Dream Author by Sophie Hannah is an immersive 14-month coaching program for writers at any and every level of experience, and also for those of you who want to write and are just waiting for the right encouragement and guidance to get you started. Your writing dreams should make you happy. For so many of us, our dreams are not a source of happiness. Instead, they cause us stress, guilt, frustration, and even shame. Here's the great news. All of these feelings are natural and all writers experience them. The problem, though, is that when your writing dreams bring you more anxiety than joy, it affects your resolve and your productivity, and you end up not taking the action you need to take in order to propel your dreams in the right direction so that they can stand a strong chance of coming true. That's why Sophie created the Dream Author Coaching Program, to teach anyone who is passionate about writing how to change the way they build, think about, and pursue their writing dreams in order to become their own most powerful ally and advocate for the rest of their writing life. And more great news. Once you've learned that skill, it lasts forever. Visit dreamauthorcoaching.com to get started today. Authors, if you're looking for a partner to help ensure that your book is the best it can possibly be, look no further than Pico's House. Crystal and her staff make a conscious effort to be critical yet courteous. They also strive to make the business side of things run smoothly so that you can rest easy knowing that your manuscript is in capable hands. Whether you need beta reading, developmental editing, a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, Pico's House is the one-stop shop for you. Check them out today at picoshouse.com to get started. So with most superhero stories, we have this elaborate mythology that's built around their backstory and how they came to have powers, and and usually there's a period where they're getting comfortable with them, and then something lets them know that this must be used for good and for justice, and you kind of have these feelings that come into the story. By having people that just wake up and have no idea who they are, why they're here, and they just have these powers. What do you think that gave you as the writer to have this really unique look at people who have developed powers?
One of my favorite themes in fiction, and I it took me until like the release of this book to realize that I've actually played with it in all of my books now. And that was totally unconscious, but I really am fascinated with the idea of a reset. In Here and Now and Then, which is my time travel one, it's a reset through time travel, which creates like different family circumstances. And then in a beginning at the end, you have characters who either willingly or just through sheer like logistics of surviving a world-killing pandemic, like they decide to reset their lives and change their identities for this. And this was kind of on the line of the same things. Again, not intentional, but it's like, you know, something that I think about a lot. I jokingly tell my wife that I would like medical technology to let us live to be about 200 years old, because then we could have like multiple careers and live in different places. And like, it's all based on like the idea of a reset. And I think part of it is like my own internal wanderlust of like trying to figure out who I am. And like, when you think you know who you are, like, is that really who you are, or can you change and adapt some more? So these are questions that I, you know, personally think about quite a bit. And in storytelling, I just really, really enjoy. So that's kind of where that whole thing came from.
I love that. You said that the setting is sort of a dressed up San Francisco.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Are there reasons why that region, that city, that place kind of meant so much to you in this situation?
Just because I live here. I live here. So it's like all of my books take place in the Bay Area. And it's simply because it's one less element of world building that you need to think about. It's like rather than having to make up the geography of a fictional city, it's like I know the city, I know the weather, I know the surrounding areas. I did name it San Delgado specifically because a lot of superhero in Marvel, they use real city names,
right?
You know, like, but then in DC, like Central City is Seattle, and you know, Gotham City is New York, and so you have things like that where it, the superhero center of action is based on, you know, actual regions.
And I love how Central City is central to nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But so I basically just took that where it kind of riffing off of that, and the name Delgado. So all of the character names here, or a lot of the character names, are based on classic Doctor Who names and actors and things like that. So Zoe and Jamie are companions of the second Doctor. San Delgado is named after Roger Delgado, who played the Master in the classic era. So that was
it's all like, making sense now.
Yeah. It's funny because actually my wife is listening to the audiobook right now, and then she there's a healthcare facility in there called Telos, and then she goes, "Oh, that was really clever that you did that, because you know in Greek mythology, Telos means the search for, you know, identity or something like that." And I go, "Actually, I named it after the planet in Doctor Who, Tomb of the Cybermen." So she was like going off for several minutes about like how it's like this model of philosophy about like, you know, discovering your identity, and even like people talk about it in terms of cybernetics now. And I just go like, it's from a Doctor Who episode.
Oh man. One of the things I love about this book and all of your books really, is the playful nature that you approach science fiction with. You know, science fiction can be extremely fun, or it can be really heavy-handed, or it can really, you know, as a genre, it can be so wide-reaching. Mm-hmm. But I love that you approach it with a sort of playful nature, and there are lots of, and it's not jokey. I don't mean it that way, but there are plenty of moments of levity in your books. Do you consider yourself a certain type of writer, or do you think about, you know, how you approach and why it is that you prefer levity over maybe I can't just pull an example out right now, but you know there are different sorts of science fiction, and yours definitely is more fun to read, if I can just put it that way.
I think I don't write epic stuff. And epic stuff, like I don't think I am capable of writing, because the amount of like world building and like the scope of conflict in there, like I could never write who writes really good epic fantasy. I'm totally blanking now. My friends are going to kill me for this. But something with like 5 battling political factions, and there's dragons, and then there's mages and things like that, and there's like an in-depth magic system and an in-depth political system, and that stuff is just does not really work for me. Like my brain doesn't think that way. But what I am very influenced by as a writer is I like character stories. And I started out, I was originally trying to write contemporary stuff. This was around like the late aughts, so like 2008 to 2010 ish. I was writing these character stories and like these family dramas with very much the same tone, but they were taking place in our modern society. And I was feeling kind of bored with them, and I was thinking like something about them is not working. And I was telling my friend that I really wish I could just put them like on a spaceship or something like that, and kind of like merge the type of story that I really like with like the world building of things that I really like. And I thought no one would ever buy that. Like science fiction has to be space opera or epic or grimdark or something like that. And then contemporary stories are the only places that you can really explore fantasy. And then she said, like, just give it a try. At the very least, you'll have worked through something that you like. And that's that eventually led to when I signed with my agent and we sold Here and Now and Then. I think the market has really shifted in like the past 5 years, and I've just been really lucky that there's a much greater acceptance to diverse stories in terms of the type of plot, type of tone, the type of cast, and I think because of that, science fiction has really opened up. So I'm just really lucky that I came in at the right time.
With a book like We Could Be Heroes, when you're dealing with characters who have memory loss and wake up sort of fully formed, if you will, that is a great setup to explore nature versus nurture.
Yeah, that's one of the big things.
Well, absolutely. How did you, as you wrote the story and kind of work through this, did you come up with any answers for yourself about kind of why we become who we are, and are we born this way? Is it is it an effect of who we're around and our surroundings? Did you come to anything for yourself from that?
I would think not necessarily through working through this book, but I have been to a lot of therapy in my life. I often joke to my wife about how like she comes from an overly emotional family for good or bad, and I come from an underwhelming emotional family for good or bad. And so we have taught ourselves, or we have taught each other to look inside and see why, and understand ourselves better, and then through that, like, we understand each other much better. So like between our evolving relationship and going to therapy and about things from your childhood and stuff. So that, I think part of that is also related to the idea of like resets, and like personality resets and charting a new course in your life. So it all comes together. And then in this one in particular, the big theme was like you said, with nature versus nurture, like the idea that society and family assign you this identity, and you may not want to be that person. And how much of a choice do you actually have in doing that? And what's the cost of like breaking past that? Like, what are the privileges you're going to lose? What are the connections you're going to lose if you choose to reject the identity that other people are trying to assign to you?
The characters of Zoe and Jamie are so different, and by on purpose, it seems like. But this is a really great look at odd friendships and what all relationships could be if we kind of let loose of some of our preconceived notions. Was that something that you wanted to explore specifically, or did it just kind of come up in, as you're kind of getting the set pieces for the story in place, like, oh, well, I could do this?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I always knew that I wanted them to be on paper totally opposite. So like their powers, one is physical and one is mental, but personality, one is methodical and very fearful, and then one is impulsive and very fearless. And I thought like that's a really interesting setup to see how we can build trust with someone who is completely unlike ourselves and still find that like they're good company. I think back to and this wasn't intentional, but I think back to as a kid growing up, like I was like super into like independent music and like, reading gothy stuff and being like into Star Wars and nerdy things and building computers. But my best friends were like members of the high school basketball team. So it's like whenever we were hanging out just by ourselves, like, we were just ourselves. And then in like a bigger social group, it would kind of be like, I would be like the outlier because, hey, I don't play basketball, but it didn't matter like when we were just hanging out. So it's kind of like that. Like that wasn't an intentional riff, but I think that's a good example of how when you strip back what people's expectations are and you let yourself relax, even if you're completely different, like even if you're like a super introvert who is into nerdy things and you're hanging out with a super extrovert who is into sports, there's probably a lot that you can still find and enjoy about that person. And it was really important to show this on a friendship level and not a romantic level, because there's already so much media that's consumed with, ship person X and person Y because opposites attract, and I think it's really, really important to acknowledge the power of friendship in a way where people consciously choose not to be romantic. I think if we just accepted that much more, all of us would be much happier and there would just be way less pressure on people, in weird ways.
Right. Absolutely. As someone who wrote a pandemic book
Yes.
that then sparked a real life pandemic.
Yeah, my bad.
What was 2020 like for you? And as a creative person, I've gotten to ask this question to several people. Writers tend to have a pretty solitary existence, and we kind of stay locked up in a room by ourselves for a lot of days. How did 2020 affect you, and how did you see your creative process shaping during the a lockdown and stay at home order and all this kind of stuff?
Well, from seeing things that came to life, like I joke that my world building must have actually been pretty good because I had reread a beginning at the end, I think in like June. And I remember in the early months how some people would send me messages about like, I really like this, but wow, this was really unnerving. And so I let myself get some distance from it. And then I reread it and I was very surprised at like the little details that I had forgotten about, like with just like the way that social distancing is treated, masks and whether some people wear masks and some people don't, and little things like that where my thought process while I was writing that was to try to look at pandemic variables on a very practical level. So it's like if you're worried about transmission from germs, then you're going to have a lot of hand sanitizer and masks. Like that just makes common sense. So I don't think I'm like necessarily prophetic with that. It was just like, hey, this is what would probably happen. But seeing it play out was very, very unnerving and weird. And revisiting that, it was very strange. I actually got some hate mail in like March of last year, where someone just accused me of like capitalizing on it and like, how dare I write a book about COVID when her father was in the hospital? And I'm like, I didn't reply because I'm like, how do I explain that publishing is like a 2-year cycle? Yeah,
there's
but yeah, that was really kind of strange.
Well, I remember last year after we spoke, and I had originally read the book as a galley that was sent to me from by your publisher, and then we spoke, and then a couple of months later, I listened to the audiobook just because I love audiobooks, and I just wanted to experience the book again, but in this way. And I remember it was I had the book on my phone and it's playing in my car as I went down to our little local Dollar General store to go buy some stuff for home. And they were sold out of toilet paper. So I guess this would have been March or April of last year, whenever that craziness was happening. And I remember getting back in the car and your book was on, and I was just thinking, damn you, Mike Chen, you did this to all of us.
I had just got a message from a new reader who screen capped the little bit of like newspaper clipping in there about Mojo's concert, which is the start of the quarantine process, and the date was March 11th, 2019. And he messages me, this guy, and he goes, "Did you realize that March 11th, 2020 was when the NBA shut down?" And I'm like, I had no idea. That was like, little things like that are just like, they're very surreal and unnerving. I had a friend who he had read my first book, and then but like he read things later than like not at the release time. So he read the beginning at the end during COVID, and he just sent a message and he's like, "What other future stuff can you tell us about?" So I get that a lot. But your question about like how has 2020 been for me as a creative, I would say I am finally hitting burnout. I was just talking with my wife and my therapist about this. I think what the variable that makes it hard is that we have a 6-year-old who is so she started kindergarten in August, which means that I am half teaching kindergarten while doing my day job, while also trying to be her friend and a partner and a housekeeper, and all these things. Like, we're all like doing these overlapping things, and my poor kid has like, she sees her parents as just like your teacher / parent / friend / servant. And she should be with other people in a community for 4 or 5 hours a day, and so we're all on top of each other, and it's just very draining mentally and physically. So I told my wife that like all I want for a gift or whatever is like a sensory deprivation chamber for like 3 hours. So it's like I've been able to be productive from a writing perspective with this, because I find writing to be very recharging, especially in this environment, because like when you're writing, you're just in your head, and it is so nice to just be in my head and not thinking about making dinner or like crafts or whatever things that my daughter needs. So it's been hard. I did, during this pandemic, I wrote the final version of We Could Be Heroes. I turned that in March. So it was basically like an editing and revision process.
Sure.
I wrote the bulk of my 4th book, which is called Second Contact, and that will be coming out a year from now. I wrote the bulk of that, and I wrote my Star Wars story about Emperor Palpatine. And I'm just starting on the early draft of my 5th book, which is called Vampire Weekend, which will come out in 2 years. So I've been productive. And it's only been in like the last maybe 2 weeks or so where I'm just feeling like completely spent. And I think part of it is because a vaccine is, in our near future. I think we're all having a little bit of that, like, it's so close, but so far away.
Right.
So yeah, it's been oddly productive. And the silver lining is I've been able to keep in touch with friends, who are, through DM chats or text chats or Zoom or whatever. And then we all have that infrastructure now to do that. And I think that'll be actually really cool going forward. Like, my daughter plays with her friends over Zoom. And I think as she grows up and she has friends who move away, or if we move or whatever, like, they will have this really cool connectivity to stay in touch with people their whole lives that we don't have. So little things like that are kind of cool. Probably not worth what it costs to take us here, but but it's trying to find silver linings like that in here.
Well, what's going to really be interesting, Mike, is seeing where sci-fi writers take us over the next 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 years, because there's been lots of stories like yours last year that looked at the what ifs. What if a pandemic happened? What would we do? And how would this affect relationships and all of this great stuff that sci-fi does for us? It gives us the opportunity to look at things that are not going on and kind of help us to prepare in a way mentally and emotionally. I wonder what things, what direction science fiction will take us now after kind of the worst case scenario happening. I wonder what's next. It's going to be interesting to see.
I think so. I had talked earlier about how Natalie, how she and I have been like on superhero panels together.
Sure.
When I was releasing a beginning at the end, I was on a lot of panels with Sarah Pinsker, who wrote a book called A Song for a New Day that actually won the Hugo. But that's a post-pandemic book. And then also Chuck Wendig, who is Wanderers was a bestseller. That's a post-pandemic book too. And so we got on several panels together to talk about pandemics within a pandemic. And so I think we all kind of agreed that you're going to get a certain, like in the next 1 to 2 years, you're going to get a certain amount of just like cheesy science fiction that's really about like, zombies in COVID or, something like that. Yeah. And that's going to happen. And that's not really related to COVID. It's just kind of the schlocky thing, like the cash in thing that happens with any sort of major event. I think what you're really going to see though is the books that are written during 2020, which means they'll probably be released in like 2022 to 2024. There's probably going to be a lot of themes of isolation and breaking apart and coming back together and figuring out how do you put back pieces together. And it's going to be in all sorts of different types of dress. So it's like, it could be about like someone who's isolated on the moon or something like that. Right. But I think those themes are going to come through in heavy volume. And then you're probably going to see a swing back the other way, where like the second half of the decade will probably have a lot more uplifting stories and lighter stories, because I think the people who are going to be writing books in 2021, 2022 are just kind of like, I'm sick of everything being grim and I want to bring some lightness into my life. Like that's actually when this book sold, I was worried that the tone of it was too different from my first two books, because those are very heavy books. And this one is very, very light on its feet. It's got action and it's got banter and quips and stuff. But the early feedback that I'm getting from readers is like, people are saying, this is exactly what I need right now. It's fun, but it's smart and it has heart. So that's good timing for me. But Absolutely. I think you're going to see creators feel that way right now, where they're just kind of like, I've been through the worst, so screw it. I'm just going to write something fun because this is what I want to do. And you're going to see that starting probably like 2024, 2025 actually come to market.
Well, We Could Be Heroes, which has absolutely nothing to do with COVID, thank God, is available everywhere now. And it's in Kindle edition or hardcover or audiobook. If you are an Audible subscriber like I am and love that format, you can get it any way that you consume books. We're going to put links to it in the show notes to make it easy for everybody to grab their copy. Mike, if people are just learning about you, God forbid, and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
So my website is mikechenbooks.com. I don't update that nearly as much as I should. I am much more active on Twitter, and that is Mike Chen Writer. It's very important to include writer, because there's also Mike Chen, the YouTube food guy, who has like 3 million followers. And so I actually just got, I did a Reddit AMA, and then someone came in and asked the question of, geez, like the person said, like, I didn't know that you also wrote books. I thought you were just the host of Strictly Dumpling. And so I had to correct, like, there are two of us. Though we have talked before because he got mistaken for something that I did. And so he tagged me, and then we just started chatting. So someday, we've talked about, we would love to do like the Mike Chen crossover podcast somewhere.
That would be amazing.
So yeah, that's Mike Chen writer, and that's where I'm much more active.
Excellent. We'll put links there as well. Mike, always fun to catch up. Thank you for writing We Could Be Heroes. This book has meant a lot to me, and I'm passing it around to everyone that I know. So thanks again for taking time to come back on the show.
Of course. I will have another release around this time next year. So if you're up for it, I am game. Excellent.
We look forward to always hanging out.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.